Welcome, everyone. I see we've got a good group of folks already here, and a number of folks continue to gather as well. I have to say I'm really excited about today's session because a very good friend and incredible colleague of mine, Dr. Bruce Perry, is joining us. I had the pleasure of joining him for his live office hours last week, and I thought to myself, I know that our communities have a good degree of overlap, but I'm sure there are people in the Think Kids community who didn't have a chance to hear that and would love to have a little time with Dr. Perry and some chance for some Q&A as well. Personally, I will say that in the last, 8-10 years or so, one of my greatest pleasures professionally has been teaching alongside Bruce. I learn so much from him every time we teach alongside each other. I think collaborative problem solving, our approach to understanding and helping kids with behavioral challenges has benefited tremendously from that collaboration. So Bruce, thank you so much for joining us. If you don't mind flipping on your video as well, that'd be great.
Let me give it a shot here. I think somebody has to give me permission, I guess. Anyway, it's nice to join you guys. I am a big bear at this moment.
I do like the shot, Bruce, and I was tempted to make all kinds of comments about your virtual background. But Jen, if you can find a way to help make sure that Bruce can turn on his video, that'd be great. Although, not that we don't want to see you, Bruce, but hearing you is actually more important right now. So I'm sure Jen is working on that. And while we do, I think I'm just going to, Bruce, ask you to take things away in a moment. Bruce is perhaps, in my mind, maybe the best person to help us guide our way through enormously stressful times like these that are traumatic for some, stressful for just about all, and have all kinds of results on our functioning, our behavior, how we're managing ourselves right now. So, Bruce, there you are.
Yeah, here I am. As all of you can see, there wasn't much, not much to see. You might as well leave the bear on us.
All right. Well, thanks again for joining us. And Bruce, maybe you could just start us off. Feel free to share slides if you want, or just talk. And you've been spending a lot of time helping people through all this, and certainly have a bunch of observations, I'm sure, to share with us, and we can use that as a jumping off point. And we'll maybe present and talk for 15-20 minutes and then open it up for a bunch of Q&A. Perfect.
So first of all, I just want to make sure that everybody knows that we're sort of a mutual admiration club. That I think I've learned a tremendous amount from Stuart, and I say all the time that collaborative problem solving and the neurosequential model are sort of a hand in glove fit. It's the core principles that we talk about all the time are just really very synchronous with what collaborative problem solving teaches, and the philosophy is very similar. So it's fun to sort of do co-teaching, because it really it makes me see our problems from a slightly different perspective. And I think all of the thing that's been happening with our group during this whole pandemic is that a lot of the things that we talk about all the time that are trying to address the emotional climate usually in a home or in a school setting where there's a lot of tension and a lot of distress. It's interesting that what we've learned from all of those experiences are helping us understand this broader problem where there's just this pervasive sense of stress, and there's a more frequent episodic distress. And so we've been asked to talk to 4 or 5 different governments, lots of different state agencies, different sort of guild groups, the healthcare professionals and mental health folks, child welfare folks. And it's interesting because almost every time after we go through this whole explanation about kind of this is the predictable impact of, what happens to the brain under stress, and people are going to be they're going to regress a little bit. They're going to be a little bit less thoughtful. They're going to be more reactive. They're going to tire out more quickly. This is a physical strain on your body. It's a mental drain on your emotions and on your central nervous system. And then everybody says, well, what can we do about it? And one of the, we talk a little bit about some of these regulatory breaks, but we always end up saying, there's this approach. You got to go read about collaborative problem solving because, it's a really nice way to ground yourself in a structured, regulated approach to sort of get into a relational rhythm to address issues that are coming up. And we talk about it, I brought this up with people in law enforcement, education, parents, and as you well know, Stuart, and people that are on this call, you guys work with all of those groups. And so what I've seen a lot of is kind of a version of decision fatigue. That people in the beginning, there's a lot of mobilization and people were thinking about how to solve some of these problems, and there were these creative things, and I think some of that's still happening. But now that we're like a month into this, I'm seeing people getting so worn out. And you can even tell by, I mean, you may not see it in your numbers, but in the beginning, the numbers that were sort of wanting our help on these live meetings, it was in the thousands.
Right.
And then it dropped down to like 500, and now it's like a consistent 250 or something. And you can just tell people are like tired of advice. They're tired of reading, the 35th article about what are the 4 things you need to do when you talk to your kids about stress. And I said this on our call, is that one of the best thing that I saw in all of this was when Stuart responded to somebody, I think maybe it was on Twitter, but you probably said it in other places as well, where you said, listen, the question isn't, how do we talk to our kids about this? We really need to really focus on how we listen. And because that's the key to all of this. The key to communication is listening. It's not talking. And I thought that was wonderful. And I think that that's something that I've tried to help people remember, that not just with their kids, but we have groups that are concerned about the pool of educators are getting worn out. And they're really, I just got off a call right before this, and with a group that's trying to put together some federal, sort of nationwide set of guidelines about how to help educators get back to the status quo. And I listened for a while, and I was kind of like, I'm not exactly sure that you're going to really get back to where you were before. So there's a lot of the stuff that has come up for us is that the amount of unpredictability, the lot of floating variables that are just out there that impede decision making. And there's a lot of people that are very uncomfortable with ambiguity. And I think it makes them very stirred up. So that's part of what we've been, those are a few of the things that we've been dealing with. But
yeah, and Bruce, one of the things I've been saying is that we, as you know, historically work with kids and their caretakers when kids are struggling with skills necessary to handle the regular old day, right? And some of those kids, one of the things they struggle with is flexibility. And so responding to normal changes in routine are a challenge. And of course, that doesn't go away with childhood either. So many of us adults struggle with flexibility. And it just seems to me that right now this time is demanding incredible flexibility and frustration tolerance and problem solving skills. And I remember saying on your webinar how you can have decent skills, but it's still being outstripped right now by the demands upon us that require better skills, honestly, than most of us have in this day and age. And you know, I'm curious to hear your thoughts more about that, and particularly when you think also about, you know, how you talk a lot about state-dependent functioning, and how you think about that in the context of COVID-19 right now.
Well, you know, and I'm not going to pull up slides. I'm just going to kind of explain it, you know, using my hands. And so we use a heuristic about the human brain that's kind of this upside down triangle V pyramid. And at the top is the cortex. The middle is kind of the limbic and diencephalic brain, the midbrain structures. And then the bottom is the brainstem. And one of the things that we know about stress and any kind of challenge, but particularly stress that's enduring, that's more than moderate stress, and that is sort of unpredictable, is that the first mental mechanism that occurs when you're under stress or threat is that your cortex starts to shut down. And your cortex is the part of your brain that's basically responsible for what we refer to as executive functioning. You know, that what you just referred to, sort of being flexible in the way you think about things, being able to come up with a solution and then run it through your brain and anticipate, well, what would happen if we did this? That ability just collapses. And so the style of problem solving that people come up with tends to be more concrete, more simplistic, sometimes reactive. It kind of depends on how threatened you are. And we've been seeing a ton of that people are getting, they're so anxious that they're dysregulated, they're shutting down sort of the smartest part of their brain. And then they get in these loops, these fear fueled loops, where rather than anticipating, you know, sort of thinking things through, like, you know, ultimately, as bad as this is, in a year, that, you know, that's the worst. There's going to be a vaccine, and it'll be get a vaccine, and things will be okay. And there'll be carnage and wreckage, economic wreckage, and people will have been hurt. But fundamentally, the vast majority of people will be okay. And we'll have opportunities to kind of rebuild elements of whatever has happened. But I can't tell you how often I've talked to people and they act as if it's sort of literally, they've used terms like, this is the end of times. And I'm like, really? Like, really? I mean, one of my favorite tweets recently was a woman who like was just shrill, and like you could just see she was enraged, and she was holding up a sign. She was one of these physical distancing protesters who was holding up this sign about, you know, give me liberty or give me death. And she's like literally this crazy emotional expression. And it's in front of a Baskin Robbins. and the tweet was like, really? Lady, this is Baskin Robbins, you know? And I just thought, that's kind of what we're seeing. We're seeing these incredible overreactions for these things that shouldn't be that overwhelming.
Well, I think, Bruce, I mean, that's a great example of, you know, we talk about in when times are decent, how very all or none black and white thinking, these sort of so-called cognitive distortions can cause trouble for you. And part of flexible thinking is being able to sort of think in a more gray fashion.
Yeah.
And, you know, these people now, if you already had that predisposition, now you layer the stress on top and it just produces that kind of thing. Now, one of the things I'm curious about is, and by the way, people are typing in some questions. Use the Q&A, folks, to type in questions, and I'll turf them here. But a great question Mary Mazio asks is, she wants to know if you could touch on the disproportionate impact of stress on under-resourced communities. Because as you just said a moment ago, a lot of people are, in a year from now, are going to be okay and rebuilding things. And I know that you've talked a lot about how there are a bunch of people and places that actually aren't going to be okay and aren't going to be okay for some time. And I wonder if you can.
And let me pull up. I am going to pull up some slides for this. So.
Okay.
But before, let me just say to Mary, awesome documentary. I don't know, Stuart, do you know about this?
I do. Yeah.
It's incredible.
I was going to be down at South by Southwest, and we're all not.
No, well, it's I'm going to show you guys some slides, and you can get access to these or at least these images are in an article that was somebody published on a Psychology Today blog, which I'll make sure everybody gets. But basically, one of the things that I'm really concerned about is that if you look at kind of what we're going through right now, and I'm going to, this is probably not the ideal way to do this, but I think you can probably see this, right?
Yep.
So what we know is that stress in and of itself isn't something that we really shouldn't view stress as a negative thing. Stress is something that actually, when it's present in predictable and controllable ways, it makes us better. So when you go exercise and go work out, you're stressing your cardiovascular system and you're making it more confident. It's the same thing with kind of academic challenges. You know, every day in school, kids are getting moderate, predictable academic stressors that help them get better at tolerating a little bit of distress and mastering whatever the cognitive content is. And so what we know is that if you've grown up in an environment where you have all of these wonderful elements of connectedness and stability and your socioeconomic status and all the things that go with that, you have a high probability of being relatively in the resilient range. And when you are able to demonstrate resilience, basically what that means is that under situations of distress, you're able to basically manage that and then get back towards your previous level of functioning. But this capability is malleable, it's changeable, it's not a set element. And so what can happen is if you are somebody who's over here, like this is your pre-COVID baseline, and I assume many of you were like this, that if this goes on long enough, even if you do all the right things, you're going to get worn out. And you're going to kind of move your homeostat. You're going to become, instead of being able to tolerate lots of stress and distress, like over here, your state reactivity curve will shift. You'll become less a superhero and more typical. And people who are neurotypical are going to get over, they're going to have some unpredictability and they're going to get a little bit more sensitized. And really what that means is in the face of a certain level of stress and challenge, rather than having a linear relationship between the external threat or challenge and your internal response, you're going to have an overreaction. And so kind of like that woman who's like acting like her life is threatened in front of the Baskin Robbins, that's a little bit of an overreaction, to closing down that business. Now here's the problem. Here's what Mary's asking me about. If you grow up in an environment where there's poverty, homelessness, unpredictability in your community, unpredictability in your home, and you're definitely at risk to start with, this event is going to basically overwhelm you. And we've already started to see this sort of thing. There's like a 38% increased prescribing of anti-anxiety medications. Most jurisdictions that have data from this are now reporting increased rates of domestic violence. Reporting of child abuse is going down, but that's because these kids are not out in the public being seen. But I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of families that are going to lose their jobs. They're going to lose their stable housing. The little bit of government resources that come into them are not going to be enough to carry them over for the next 6 months. And they're just going to be lots and lots and lots and lots of challenged families. And this is what I'm worried about. We saw this happen after Katrina. The families that were like this before Katrina, they ended up over here. And so as you track their kids as they got older, their rates of suicide, mental health problems, domestic violence issues, opiate abuse were significantly higher than comparable groups that didn't have their lives destroyed by Katrina. So as Mary's asking, pointing out, this population is, in my mind, the ones that are at greatest risk, and I'm most worried about.
Thank you for addressing that one, Bruce. Another question. People are typing in a bunch of great questions here. I know you've touched upon this before, and I'm hearing this question both from families I work with, but all kinds of places as well. Is just if you have kids with ADHD, for instance, with that diagnosis, but let's be more broad than that, kids who have a hard time focusing on their remote learning and are very easily dysregulated. And someone's pointing out how that dysregulation is contagious, something you've taught people for sure. And they're asking thoughts to help enforce structure and schoolwork at home without everyone collectively losing their minds. And I think this is the big challenge, right? How much to try to enforce or set that structure, how much to just let it all rip, and whether you find some middle ground. I think people would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, you actually mentioned on the webinar you did with us, where you were doing a lot of Plan C during this situation, that there's just some stuff you just got to let go.
Right.
And I think under these circumstances, it's interesting. I really do think that families have to have a little bit more conversation about what are we going to let go, and at the same time, how do we bring regulating structure to the day? So you may want to let go of things like, getting all your homework done the right way, or over focusing on academics where it's going to be a fight about everything, and introduce more structure by bringing dosing to the things the child likes to do. So if the child likes to do, let's say, for example, if they really do get regulated and they love to play video games, give them a dosing schedule of video games that doesn't take it away from them, but let them see, all right, here's your schedule. You're going to have hours of playing video games today, but it's going to be in 20-minute blocks. And you get 20 minutes, and then I'm going to give you a timer 5 minutes before you got to go. You're going to get the first warning, and then when it goes off the second time, then you got to get up and you got to go with me, and you and I are going to take a walk. And so what you try to do, you're bringing some structure to their day, but make it regulatory structure. Things that are not going to be, that they're not going to they're not going to cause a fight.
And can you just define for people who are newer to this here? Because by the way, these are attracting a wider audience than typical for us. So some people who'll be relatively unexposed to either of our work. When you say sort of regulatory activities, can you just speak a little bit more to what you mean by regulatory activities?
Sure. So so here's your brain, upside down triangle brain. Top part of your brain, the thinking part of your brain's up here. Down here, you have these more of a regulatory set of systems in your brain. And what we know is, and I'm not going to explain why, but what we know is that those systems that are lower in the brain that kind of control your regulation and how anxious you are, or really, let's go with that, how anxious you are, that those systems actually are quieted down and you feel less anxious if you do patterned, repetitive, somatosensory things. And when I say somato, I mean body, and sensory means any of your senses. So if you have auditory input that's patterned and rhythmic, like music, if you do needlework, and that's motor feedback to that part of the brain, it's rhythmic motor feedback. If you like to spackle, if you like to walk, if jumping jacks, people do bilateral tapping, there's all kinds of pattern, repetitive things that you can do that bring rhythm into the interaction. And for reasons I'm not going to go into, but it basically makes you feel regulated. And I think most of you probably can think about yourself and you think, oh yeah, when I really get anxious, I like to go take a walk, or I put the music on, or I do my needlework, or something like that. And your children are going to be like that too. That if there's some somatosensory regulatory thing that you can do with them, that will make it a lot easier for the child.
Thank you for clarifying that, Bruce. And I think folks are asking some questions. I was struck by the word enforce, because one of the things I think you want to be careful of is you don't want to be in the role of enforcer. So you might have the greatest ideas for regulating activities, and the kid may not be particularly eager to do them. So that's where collaborative problem solving helps you decide. Are you going to try to impose this? Is that worth that? Should you drop it? Or, you know what, if what Bruce is saying here is important, but the kid's got some concerns about it, collaborate. Use the structure of what we call Plan B to try to get their perspective, their concerns on the table. What do they like? What do they not like? You know, what's their perspective on their structure and their schedule for the day? You express your concerns and bring them to the table to collaborate with you. Now, I've got a question here that's come in. Our young folks ask the best questions, I have to say, in my experience. And we have one from a 15-year-old joining us here who says, how do you think social distancing affects the brain? Just curious how not seeing my friends could affect me. And I think we've touched upon it a little bit here, but love to hear your direct answer to that, Bruce.
So here's first of all, as you probably know, one of the wonderful things about, human to human contact is it makes you feel better, right? You feel pleasure when you see your friends, and you feel more regulated. And so one of the key things about human to human contact is that it's an essential element of our health, physical health, mental health, social health. When you're with people who you feel connected to, you're healthier. And when you're separated from them, it makes you more vulnerable. You don't have as much reward. You don't have you have to use other forms of regulation. Now, fortunately, social media, and the newer technologies allow us to do FaceTime or some other form to connect with people. It's not the same, as I'm sure you know, but it temporarily is not a terrible substitute. But there's no doubt about it that it makes people more vulnerable. And the people who are most vulnerable to this kind of social distancing are the people who, at baseline, might have had already been a little bit in that kind of relational poverty range, that they did not have a lot of really strong connections. They were not, they may have moved away from a group of kids that they knew before. They may be new to a neighborhood. They may not have any extended family that they can connect with. They may be the only child in the household. There's a lot of factors that can make you feel a lot more isolated. And so I do think that temporarily there are going to be some people that are going to feel more lonely. They're going to feel, they're going to seek out other forms of pleasure. Like you might find yourself overeating, eating more sweet, salty, fatty foods than you otherwise would. And, that's, one of the unfortunate maladaptive forms of sort of self-soothing and regulation and reward. But I think in the long run, I think most people are going to be okay, because this is going to start ending, one way or another, and we may have to restart it again. But I think most states are really working hard to let up a little bit on this. So
it's sort of striking for me to think about if we didn't have the technology that we have to enable us to stay connected right now, where we would be. And I know, Bruce, I think something that you communicated early on to folks was that, we need to remember to be distant physically, but that doesn't mean we can't try to be emotionally close at the same time. And it's a struggle. It's harder, as you said. It's a stand-in temporarily, but it's crucial.
Just to sort of follow up on that, is that most of us experienced a lot of social connectedness kind of unconsciously. We didn't really realize, we didn't sit around going through our day thinking about how many times we connected with a friend or something like that. But now this is the time to intentionally, literally think about reaching out and connecting to people, because you're not running into anybody.
Right.
So you really have to be intentional about it. And I would recommend you make a list of the people that you want to connect with. And as you know, every hour, just make a check and go, hey, let me send so-and-so a text, and let me see if they want to FaceTime, and kind of, whether it's your grandparents or your other relatives, your friends. I think if you're more intentional about this, you're going to feel a little bit better about it.
I got a text late last night from somebody I haven't spoken to in over a year, and I don't speak to a lot. And it was just the nicest text, reaching out and saying, like, how you doing? How's the family? Here's what we're up to. And my youngest son knows this guy, so I sent it on to him. And my son said, that's really nice, but random. Why now? And I said to myself, I think I know why now, because this is somebody who realizes that, you know, we're extra disconnected right now, and he's trying to be intentional about reaching out to people, just as you say. Yeah. So I'm struck now, Bruce, we're getting a bunch of questions about really young ones. So preschoolers, 4-year-olds, particular comment. I'm looking at a 4-year-old daughter who's really social and is grieving her friends in school, and she cries at night and is asking if everything's okay, and Zoom and other things don't seem to be cutting it. And it's interesting because there's other questions about this. And then on the flip side, I see a comment about suggestion for dealing with grief from losing people and not being able to have contact with loved ones who are older adults in facilities and isolated homes. So both ends of the continuum. But I'm wondering particularly if you have some thoughts about how we help the really young to manage a circumstance that they're going to have a really hard time wrapping their head around cognitively, at least.
Exactly.
That kind of top-down regulation that you talk about, that we're all up in our head talking about why we got to do this, and in 3 weeks I'm going to be able to get out if I just hang in there. They're not doing that. Yeah. Thoughts?
You know, and the irony of the way little ones want to socialize is that even if you put them with a bunch of other little kids, it's not like they're going to go over and do face-to-face interactions, right? Right. They're all about, they feel this social milieu. It's sort of like they feel people around them. And they like to parallel play. They like to watch other people do things. I heard this story of a nephew who's got I think he must be like a 3.5-year-old. And he's literally going through the same thing, like what's going on? Why can't I play with my friends? Why can't I see other kids at the playground? And he was in his backyard that has a fence and heard a kid in the next door climb the fence and went over into the next yard. You know, so that hunger for socialization in human beings is powerful. And you cannot explain to these kids. They don't understand the sense of time. They don't understand what a vector is. You know, the whole concept of why you're doing this just is lost.
Flattening the curve, right?
Yeah. So, you know, a big part of what you're going to have to do when you have little ones is you have to explain stuff again and again and again and again. And you're also going to have to remember that they're not there's a couple things that you can do. Literally putting on the noise of other people in the background, you know, is something that will help them. So for example, if you know somebody else who's got a toddler and you just put on your, you know, FaceTime or your phone and just put it on and they hear a kid in the background, sometimes that's enough. They'll go play and then they'll come wander and look at and see if they can see the person. And then they'll go wander off and get them to play some more. And so their experience of socialization is just way different. See, we're thinking they're going to go face to, you know, put the 15-year-old in front of it. They're going to talk with each other and they're going to say things. But these kids want background noise. They also want tactile stuff.
Let's pivot a little bit to take some other questions here. One person saying really significant event, obviously, that will change to some degree many aspects of healthcare, both mental and physical healthcare. And they're wondering if you feel that there'll be changes to mental health care specifically, increased focus on services for folks who've experienced trauma, virtual interactions, things like that. And they're also asking, what does this mean for collaborative problem solving, which, you know, is such a relational approach as well. So curious to hear your thoughts on this one.
Well, and, this has come up a couple of times with us because and Stuart knows this because we've talked about this a lot. Our group, the sort of this Neurosequential Network, and we've been doing this kind of teaching and clinical work for many years. So we're kind of comfortable with it. Certainly has some downsides, but we think the upside is that like we can have a clinical interaction with somebody far north in Canada who would have to spend 2.5 days getting to an appointment in Edmonton for a mental health visit. So we think that in some ways, these new technologies, it can allow us to do certain things. The other thing that I hope that we change a little bit in mental health is we think differently about dosing. And this is one of the reasons I love collaborative problem solving, because collaborative problem solving is a disseminated approach that allows a parent, a teacher, a therapist to use the same sort of process and do it in doses that are physiologically meaningful. So you can have a 4-minute problem B sort of, or plan B interaction. And then you can come back to it 10 minutes later and do it again. And so you have this iterative process that I think is more physiologically meaningful for changing systems in the brain. And I hope that the mental health field begins to, can learn from this and recognize that you can really get therapeutic doses with just a 5-minute call. It's probably better for somebody who feels really depressed and overwhelmed to have 5, 10-minute calls than to have 1 50-minute visit. Oh.
All right. Now I'm going to throw at you, Bruce, in our last minutes here, sort of the question I'm getting a ton, which is just the resistance to doing school at home, and lacking what somebody's asking about is sort of a work ethic, because their daughter is grade 4, feels like it doesn't matter, and interested in hearing ideas about how to inspire her to care and engage. I will add that I'm struck though by the fact she's in a Montessori school in grade 4, which is a very engaging model, but hugely dependent on sort of free exploration and social interaction as well, and really doesn't lend itself particularly well, I think, or easily, I should say, to the current remote learning environment. But any words of wisdom you could share with her, Bruce? It's sort of
and this is the advice I'm giving all of the schools that we work with and all of the school districts, and is to just not worry about the academics. Here's what we know. Again, here's our little upside down version of the brain. When the brain is like this, you can learn stuff very, very, very quickly. When the brain is like this, it doesn't matter how much you push, cajole, punish, anything, the brain, you're not going to get anything into the brain. And so the key is when a child feels safe and regulated, and that is usually in context of a relationship, they'll open up and be easy to teach. But right now is not the time to worry too much about academics. If the child, if we just kind of get through this next few months, and we're able to kind of get back to some semblance of normal in a few months, all that learning stuff is going to come pretty easily. But the more what you don't want is the child to not like school, to not like you, to not like whatever's going on in the household now, because there are little fights all over the place about, doing your homework.
Which is why as Bruce said earlier, we're advocating for probably heavier use of Plan C right now than usual, which is not, just to be clear, not parents giving in, teachers giving in. It's deciding proactively that some of these expectations are going to be shelved temporarily, not forever.
And I can just tell you from what's going to really happen after sort of all of this is washed out, even in schools that have most parents have pretty good internet access, they're going to realize that even though we kind of had them go through the curricular content, we're going to have to redo it.
Absolutely.
They're all going to have to, this is going to be a do-over year. just, it's a do-over. Just,
Right.
it's okay,
Well, and I think it's a good reminder too of, look, most of the best learning that goes on happens in a relational context and a relationally rich environment. And that's hard to do when everybody's trying to pull off something new over the internet.
Yeah.
So I'm mindful of the time here. Couple of things I want to wrap up with. First of all, I know there's a question of, is this going to be shared recording? It will be. So follow us on social media. I think kids will post it. I'll post it on my Twitter, and I'm sure Bruce will share it as well, so people can listen to the whole thing. You can pass it along. But we'll also share where Bruce has some unbelievable resources that are on his website that people can avail themselves of at any time. Next week, by the way, my guest will be my first couples and family therapy supervisor at Mass General Hospital, from whom I learned a tremendous amount. But she's actually written a book literally on the family dinner and the importance of family dinner as a routine and a ritual, but does a lot of deep thinking about how do you use routine and ritual in a new time like this, especially. So Dr. Ann Fischel is going to join us next week. So I hope many of you will join us for that. But this has been a special pleasure. And Bruce is in great demand right now. We had to steal him away from Oprah for a little while so he could talk with us. So we're honored, my friend. Keep up your great work. Thanks for joining us, everybody. I really hope you found this helpful. Sorry we couldn't get to all the questions, but tried to do our best. Thanks again, Bruce. Stay
My pleasure, Stuart.
healthy and safe, my friend.
Okay. Keep up the good fight.
You too.